Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin, and good morning, everyone. And thank you all for taking time out on your Friday morning to come and join this session. So, I'm Nimal Dewi. I'm a registered social worker. I've got a bit of a double role. So, I'm head of practice development at What Works for Children's Social Care. And until the end of the month, I am also the programme lead for Workforce Race Equality Standards. Um, and today, there are a few speakers here who are going to be talking to you about our journey into writing this book, The Anti-Racist Social Worker. And so I'm going to be kind of introducing them in turn. And some of us are going to be reading little kind of extracts from the book and explaining why we've participated and what this movement is, because it is a movement. Um, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce Glory, who's going to talk about how the book came about, how we got together in the first place um, to make this happen and why, and just say a little bit about the journey for her chapter. So, Glory.
Just unmuting myself there. Power of technology. Um, good morning. My name is Glory. I'm a co-editor of the Anti-Racist Social Work book. And because for unknown reason, I have, I don't know, I've misplaced my copy and it had some great scripts in there. So I've got an electronic version with me here. So don't worry, I'm just turning the pages of my electronic version, which seems a bit weird because I'm used to turning the pages and presenting the book like this. So I'm trying to get to the front page of the book so that everyone can see it. So, can everyone know? You cannot see that, but that's fine. Nimal has shown you the book. So the book came about when I first started as a newly qualified social worker. I'd met Tanya in one of our inset days where Tanya was telling us about how Hertfordshire County Council needed people of ethnic diversity within upper management. After she had said that, I approached her at the end of the day and said to her, well, it's good and well you saying that, but if I'm not seeing anyone of an ethnic minority background, how am I going to get there myself? Tanya took that personally. And then we were again introduced when Hertfordshire County Council introduced Mentoring for Inclusion pilot. Through that way, we had two profiles. My profile and Tanya's profile were meshed. And then we started our sessions on Mentoring for Inclusion. A relationship was formed through that. And then Tanya went on to, I think she went on to Twitter and tweeted, is anyone wanting to do social work action for against racism? And then a group was formed, Social Work Action 21. We've got a tweet account, and if you look, we've also got a YouTube account for the book as well. So from there, the group was formed, and we had quite a few authors who been able to take part in the book. So from here, what I'll do is that I'll just read a brief introduction for you guys to kind of get a feel of before my lovely authors start reading their chapters. Just give me a moment. I'm just swiping. Just give me a moment. So this book of stories is about anti-racism activism by social workers and staff working in social care organization and university. It introduces a cast of activists consisting of students, practitioners, educators, and leaders, each of whom saw a need for action and took it upon themselves to create a change. The summer of the first COVID lockdown, the murder of George Floyd in Minnesota, catapulted a burgeoning conversation about race into a raw and honest acknowledgement of the experiences of Black people in the UK. There's a lot to talk about. And the Equality and Human Rights Commission's report, Healing a Divided Britain, found that in comparison to white people, Black people face higher rates of unemployment, of poverty, of school exclusion, of persecution, and of homicide. The existence and impact of structural and systematic racism in the UK isn't a new conversation, but white people's ownership of individual responsibility and accountability is. Social work is recognizing its own problems with racist systems and its failure as a profession that strives for social justice to address this as any meaningful way. But this book shows how social workers continue their traditional of activism by taking ownership of the urgent need to dismantle racism. So from this, we have many contributors from direct practice, leadership, and supporting roles. And obviously, there's two editors, myself and Tanya, who's not here. From here, I'll take it from Nimal so that she can introduce our readers.
Yeah, thank you, Glory. And I was remembering as you were talking there that moment that I think we were watching. I remember it being a kind of a cold, dark night, and we were watching a seminar that was put on by the Tavistock called "Whiteness: A Problem of Our Time" by Helen Morgan, and it was really hard hitting. And I remember feeling. As was happening a lot that year in 2020, that there's this kind of webinar thing, and I'll have it on in the background, and I'll kind of be making my dinner, or clearing up my inbox or something like that, and I'll just have it on in the background. And I couldn't move. I couldn't stop watching it. I couldn't look away because it was so powerful and it was so hard hitting. I think the webinar is still available via YouTube, and maybe when we send out the recording, we can send the link. And the way that the art was used to tell a story. It was really gripping. And that's when kind of Tanya came to Twitter, and well, a few of us were like, is anyone watching this? This is amazing. And afterwards we Gloria, you reminded me of when we were sort of thinking, we've got to do something. We can't just watch this, listen to this, and then not do anything. And so that's when kind of Tanya said, like, who's in? We don't know what we're doing, but shall we do something? And then we got together, and first it was 5, and then it was 10, then it was more and more people, and it's that was the start of the journey to having a bit of a kind of a Twitter campaign, and then Glory's kind of idea of like, these are our stories, we need to kind of collect them, and we need to share them, because actually we were hearing that a lot of people are experiencing similar things. So yeah, thank you for that, Glory. And one of the people that has kind of joined the movement is Baldis. So I'm going to hand over to you, Baldis, to tell us a little bit about yourself and read an extract from your chapter.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. I'm Baldis McGarren. I'm a team manager in Hertfordshire County Council. I've been a social work qualified person since 1994. I always used to think people were much older, that they've said they've been qualified for 20, 30 years, and I've now realised suddenly I'm that wrinkly social worker. Yeah, it creeps up on you, but it's a profession that I have always loved. I fell into it by accident, as many of us do, from doing care and support work in the community, and at that time I wanted to do more, and the qualification seemed like the door to open up more opportunities to support vulnerable people and advance my own career. So that's me in terms of professional qualification. I wasn't on Twitter, so I came very late to this party. I don't know if I was deliberately left off the invite list. I'm not sure. I'm not really much of a party goer. But in the section of work, I am the only team manager of colour, and have been for many years. So felt quite isolated. But I've always had, a focus on anti-racism and tried to do what I could. Things are improving a little bit, but what projected me into doing something a bit more active was the death of George Floyd. So if I read my story, it'll explain my journey and the little bit of activism that I did in my corner of the world. Okay, so this is the story of how a social care department began a conversation about race. My first conversation about race was as a 6-year-old with my father. Are we human beings? I asked. Because we are brown. I grew up in a multicultural working class area, unaware that the colour of your skin or your faith made a difference to how you were seen and treated. I was the only brown girl in my class at infant school. I didn't know it at the time, but this was the start of my being othered. I have a vivid memory of sitting on a wall alone during playtime while the other children played together. No one said anything. I learned that even though my colour made me stand out, I was also invisible. I accepted that this was how things were for people of colour. Through my years of education and most of my professional life, I didn't talk about race, except to confirm I don't eat curry every day. I can use a knife and fork. I speak good English because I was born and educated here, and I do originally come from my birthplace of Wolverhampton. Social work is a wonderful profession. At its core, it's about developing nurturing relationships and supporting people to overcome barriers so they can be treated fairly and equally. But it's easier to speak up for others than for yourself. And throughout my career, I've struggled to respond to other people's reactions to my race. Fast forward to May 2020, COVID lockdown and the murder of George Floyd. I watched the news feeling overwhelmed by grief and horror. Here was a black man who had been murdered by racism. Once again, a person of colour not being treated as a human being. But this time, people were speaking out. Finally, we were finding our voices. But at work, there seemed to be silence in the room. Why was it so hard to speak about racism when we knew our black colleagues would be so profoundly affected by these events? I was deeply bothered by the pain I knew my black and brown colleagues would be feeling. As a manager of colour in a predominantly white-led organisation, I knew I needed to take leadership, but as a woman of colour, I had my own fears and feelings about speaking out. I put my own fears on pause and decided to speak. If no one were to respond, at least a person of colour would have had the last word on the email trail. If nothing happened, well, I've survived the familiar pain of silence before. This is what I sent. For those of us of colour, every person of colour is our brother, our sister, with a shared history of racism and discrimination. We are visible, yet invisible. We are essential, but of no value. Corona is not the only virus killing us. In George, we have lost a brother. That is why the pain is felt so deeply. I knew these words could provoke either a strong reaction or nothing. Would there be a backlash? The email was far-reaching, going out to many colleagues at different levels across our service. But would I be once again met with silence? The striking truth is that colleagues from across the organisation took up my invitation to talk about race. The email became a trail with its own momentum as people shared their stories, vulnerabilities, and heartbreaking and sometimes brutal experiences. It was as if our social care community came together to listen to each other, offer support, and show a willingness to learn and understand the world as experienced by people of colour. Contributions illustrated the thoughts and feelings of colleagues at the time. I'll just pick out one. On a personal level, my heart goes out to you for the pain you feel. And on another level, it deepens my understanding and awareness of daily experiences for people of colour and what role I have in perpetuating it or contributing to change. I used to think anti-racist action needed to be a formal strategy with a plan and the right people, but now I see that action can be as simple as finding the courage to speak up. Thank you. That's the end of my little reading.
Thank you, Baldis. And I've heard you read that chapter and extracts from that chapter a few times, and it's always very, I was going to use the word haunting. I don't know if that's the right kind of, but I can also see in the chat people are sort of saying this is powerful and it reminds them and brings back memories. And some kind of key standout phrases is, you know, standing out and being invisible at the same time. And how I'm sure people can identify with that. And this kind of familiar pain of silence when you're trying to kind of speak up and kind of lift your head up, and how difficult that can be, but then also what can be created, and what you've kind of created as a result of doing that. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Our next person to speak from the chapter is Doreen. And Doreen, if you would like to just kind of say a little bit about yourself and then read from your chapter. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Doreen Dov. I'm a mental health social worker, social work manager, AMP lead for the City of Wolverhampton Council. I also have Romany Gypsy heritage, and was really excited to be invited to contribute to this book. So I'm going to read an extract which tells you my story. So I'll crack on. The word gypsy was the main diss word when I was a kid. It seemed so strange to me. I didn't get why kids at school used it as an insult. I thought lots of people at school had a mum and a nan like mine. Then I started to understand. I started to see the world for what it really was and how the world viewed my family. I started to feel disconnected from the social norms my friends were embracing because I realised I was different. Despite my heritage, I was accepted by my peers. I was told that by them I wasn't a gypsy because we lived in a house. I knew they were wrong. Thankfully, I had my family to remind me of that. As a teenager, the sense of injustice grew and I started to put people right about my heritage. And the first seeds of me becoming an anti-racist social worker were sown. I spent a lot of time with my nan growing up. My mum and aunts insisted she live with family after my granddad died. She flooded me with romanticised tales of her life with a sprinkling of hardship. I know now that she was lying. There was a lot of hardship. My nan's and our clan stories taught me strength in family and to always question the authorities and their agendas. I have an inherent distrust for the power of large institutions. So when I discovered sociology and started to understand theories like social constructionism, I guess it was written that I was going to become a social worker. My main motivation is for racism against Gypsy, Roma and travellers to no longer be an acceptable form of racism, and for people and families to no longer be targets of racism. I made a pledge to never allow the opportunity to be an anti-racist social worker pass me by. So in past experiences, when a home visit to a traveller family was risk assessed as a 2-person visit, I asked why and started conversations about racism. It's never been easy, but challenging perceptions can lead to positive change. I've been a lone voice and it hurts. Being witness to overt racism without a second thought of who might be hearing it from previous colleagues, people in power and positions of trust can cut deep. Unfortunately, I have had ample opportunity to practice my skills of challenging racist attitudes throughout my life. But fortunately, I have discovered allies along the way. Although I once felt like a lone voice grasping opportunities to change individual minds and with the yearning to do more, the British Association of Social Workers called out on social media for Gypsy Roma traveller social workers to come together, and they got an immediate response from me. What started as an online call with 2 other people from my motor in a car park on my way home from work one day went on to create the Gypsy Roma Traveller Social Work Association. I now feel more confident to speak out in larger rooms and have been able to raise awareness about Gypsy Roma traveller communities in wider discussions about inclusion and anti-racist social work. The frequent absence of considerations for Gypsy Roma traveller communities in such forums speaks volumes. We have a lot of work to do, but I no longer feel like a lone voice. I'm part of the Gypsy Roma Traveller Social Work Association. They are my social work client, and change is coming. So yeah, my story really highlights how, you know, small what seem at the time like conversations with a small number of people can really kind of develop, and we've gained a lot of momentum. We've been very busy in the Gypsy Roma Traveller Social Work Association. We are still a very small group, but the majority of us are from the Gypsy Roma Traveller community, and we have some allies who are activists and academics. And yeah, we are really committed to be change makers. We're on Twitter, so look us up. I can put our details in the chat. And very excited to say that next month we are launching a special interest group. So I'll put those details in the chat as well. So anybody who is interested in that, please do approach us and get involved. Come and join our clan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doreen. And you've also got a really fantastic animation that hopefully you can kind of share in the chat as well. And people may have heard me say before that having watched that animation and actually talking about it with my own family and our own history and our clan and our tribe and our kind of nomadic roots, and how, not, I was going to say the realization, but I think we kind of always knew it, but that particular animation really helped us to kind of think about ourselves as people and how we move across kind of globally, and that, you know, there's so much more that unites us than drives us apart as humans. And that animation really facilitated that conversation in my own family. So I do encourage you to watch it and you know, connect. And also, you know, how to create a movement. It's like, just start it, just get together, have a conversation, and things will happen. So thank you for that again, Doreen. It's me now, folks. So I've introduced myself already, but if you're just joining, I'm Nimal Dewi, and I am going to talk about the chapter which I contributed to, which is about a journey to workforce race equality standard. So I'll read a little bit, I won't, you know, and I'll kind of fill in some blanks as we kind of go along. So this story is about the creation of a workforce race equality standard in social care, or RES for short. The RES is a way of monitoring experience of white and minoritized staff. The NHS has a RES, but despite all we know about the barriers to opportunities for Black staff working in social care, and I mean Black in its widest sense, there was until recently no social care equivalent. There have been many people involved in the RES, from the original scoping review that the Principal Social Worker Network was involved in. And this story tells our part in this journey. So the three of us telling this story are Mark Harvey, who was then one half of the Chief Social Workers in Adults, and myself, and Zohal Shafiq, who is a phenomenal civil servant and is really the brains behind all of this, really. So as I said, there are three of us telling this story. We all relate to the issue of racism from different perspectives. Two of us are women who, because of the colour of our skin, have experienced marginalisation. One of us is a white male who is privileged to have no such experience. Our story is of allyship, activism, personal experience, and the real life impact of an institutionally racist system that doesn't reflect the wondrous diversity of our workforce. The work of Social Work Action 21 made us reflect back on the journey to the RES, and we've much to learn, but also a drive not to let this slip again. So the story then goes on to Mark sort of talking about a time when he was sitting in an auditorium in 2016 at NCAS conference, which is the National Children's and Adult Service Conference. That's an annual conference that kind of senior leaders and practice leaders attend every year. And they were sitting around and they sort of said they realized that the leadership was really white. Everyone, where's the brown people? Is that, and they were having a conversation kind of with each other. And so then the book reflects that as social workers, we're incredibly lucky to work in a profession that values everyone. We seek social justice, equality, and human rights for all. But where these are absent, it's our role to do something about it. So they kind of said, well, it's not enough. They were, the story then continues that it's not enough for us to kind of sit here and just notice it and then not do something. What are we actually going to do about this? So social worker at operational level is one of the most vibrant and diverse professions. In 2020, data from UCAS, which is the Universities and College Admissions Service, demonstrated that in terms of race, social work was the most diverse undergraduate course in England. And this diversity is further reflected in our qualified workforce. And then the book goes on to give you the data from a freedom of information request that he and colleagues made at that time, which included the diversity of principal social workers and senior leaders. And it kind of breaks that down in some detail. So fast forward a little bit. So in 2020, the summer of the first COVID lockdown, worked to develop a social care workforce equality standard through the Chief Social Worker's Office in the Department of Health and Education began in earnest. We knew the next months would involve us flying the plane while building it, and all of us from our virtual working setups in our bedroom. We also knew we'd be relying on the support of colleagues to push for the res to make a real difference. The topic of race was bound to bring another level of personal and professional investment from us all, and we were ready for it. We'd all worked on a variety of projects to support and uplift the profession, but this time it felt much more emotive, tapping as it did into the pain and trauma of racism that minoritized members of this group and the Chief Social Worker's Office carried with them all the time. And then it kind of goes into a little bit more detail about how we kind of stood the res up. So action was needed, and senior leaders throughout local and national government began to wrestle with their responsibility to respond. Staff forums throughout many local authorities were describing the impact of racism, and we were hearing senior leaders saying they were shocked at what they'd heard and reported they had no idea of the extent of the experience of racism in their workforce, and made commitments to address racism in the workplace. And so Zohal at that time liaised with policy advisors and analysts to devise a plan for national action, which pushed for tangible solutions to tackle disparities head on. So I'm just kind of looking at the time briefly. So I will kind of fast forward a little bit to what I was going to read. So many people we spoke to at the time and still are skeptical, because let's face it, we've been here before. Minoritized people had long ago noticed the whiteness at events like NCAS. Only now white people were noticing and showing commitment to do something about it and call out the inertia of their peers. Only now was the scale of the problem becoming increasingly apparent to employers. So just the last little bit that I'll read is, the social care res in itself will not make change in and of itself, but it's a strong commitment and one that we're proud of, that many local authorities have taken on. We will all make mistakes and be frustrated by the lack of pace, but this is a positive and long awaited step forward. Our hope is that a few years from now, we'll have a strong national database and a set of creative, evidence-based activities that support and protects as the well-being and aspirations of our minority ethnic workforce and communities. This is about being the anti-racist organisations our professions would demand of us. And if our sector doesn't embrace these approaches, we must take action to demand it of ourselves. So that tells you a little bit about, some kind of more kind of structural things and data, and how we might kind of get a national picture about actually what's going on in terms of our workforce. So without further ado, I'm just going to check whether Omar has managed to join us, who's not here with us. So I'm going to hand over to Glory, who's just going to briefly tell you a little bit about some of the other chapters in the book.
Thank you very much. Just unmuting myself there. I might have edited that book, but every time the ladies read their chapters, it just still gives me goosebumps. I think at the time when we were editing, well, when I was editing the book with Tanya, there are points where I had to put down some chapters because based on what they were saying, I was shedding tears because obviously knowing that I'm not the only one on this journey. So if there's one take-home message from this book, we hope that is an anti-racist position, is an active one. If you look into our book, you'll see, because I'm just going to slowly represent the people who are not here to read their chapters. So in chapter 2, Tanya represents anti-racism as a verb, not an adjective, because systematic racism is a powerful default position. To be an anti-racist must mean to actively disrupt the status quo. It is not enough to think non-racist thoughts. Anti-racism must be an action. Our social work action group 21 was in a campaign for action that took place when a small group of social workers who met online came together to agitate for change. Each diverse group of social workers has had enough reasons for needing to take action against racism. If there is it's very personal stories of lived experiences and direct action that for the most part make up this book. And then obviously we had Omar, who couldn't make it as without today. He wrote that chapter with Diana Katoto, and they are social work students who in their first year as social work degree staged a campaign to decolonize the social works training curriculum. Theirs is an important campaign in its own right, but their story reminds us that we all can be activists. In joining the group, Diana and Omar were working alongside experienced social workers, academics, and practice leaders. Whatever the status quo of our day job, our shared values and the anti-racist vision put us together. Whenever we in our career, social work activism can and should remain central to the way we learn and practice as social workers. And then we had Zoe Thomas in chapter 4. She wrote a personal and powerful polemic show that this must happen. Zoe's story is a story of academic activism in which she explores her own existence as a Black social work academic, considering how her commitment to unapologetically own her space to create discomfort and disruption. Zoe's model of reparation in social work education is practically and highly applicable in suggestions for universities' action. Racism is a problem created by white people, I know, and it's for white people to lead on its destruction. While there's no sense or use in individual white people feeling guilty for the collective impact of centuries of structural racism, there's a clear responsibility for every white person to recognize racism and its impact and take individual ownership of their part in its deconstruction. Liz Howard's journey to allyship is the story of her increasing understanding of white social worker, of what it means to have white privilege. and her determination to make meaningful action. Liz charts her realization that inactive, albeit benign racism is a dangerous position that supports racist structures and shows how she uses her role to actively promote anti-racist action. And then the chapter continues to chapter 6 with Joe Williams writes, as a white British academic from a mixed heritage family, Jo Williams considers her development, awareness, and understanding of racism in both her personal and professional life. Jo writes a beautiful presentation and very personal story of learning from others and how this helps her own journey to become an anti-racist social worker and an educator. The Black Lives Matter campaign focuses our attention and calls for urgent action to combat racism towards people who have Black or brown skin. And all right, so there's an urgent need for white people to understand how hard it is to be a Black person in a world that's assumed and prizes whiteness. But specifically, predominantly white ethnic groups are also subjected to racism, which, although experienced differently, is dangerous and equally undermining to any sense of safety and belonging. And then we have, I don't know whether Vicky was in today, but she writes chapter 8. In that one, she writes, to be Jewish is to live viscerally sorry, I lost my tongue there. Extenuatingly, oh no, I just murdered that word. I should jump on. Put it simply, it means living with the knowledge that the veneer of acceptance can shatter in an instant, and there can never be a sense of safety or belonging. Uniquely to anti-Semitism as a form of racism is the racist trope of power, wealth that Jewish people appear to be a fair target. The result is that fewer people are prepared to step forward as allies. And as anti-Semitism attacks calls for the death of all Jewish people rise, echoes of the Holocaust reverberate, and the response silence is deafening. So Victoria Hart's History of Anti-Semitism in chapter 8 notes how even though being Jewish is a protected character, anti-Semitism is not recognized as a racism by social workers, and its terrifyingly impact is not acknowledged. If opening a conversation is starting point of awareness and understanding, and ultimately action, there needs to be careful consideration of how those prepared to accept the vulnerability of speaking out can be supported. In chapter 9, Lydia and Marie share their story of creating a forum for talking about racism, inequality, active anti-racist practice. Conversations about race can be difficult and emotive, but Lydia and Marie show how a conversation underpins by systematic thinking and practice can be a meaning to support safe and purposeful dialogue. And in chapter 10, Jen Hopper and Akwazi describe how they created a separate space for Black and white workers to talk about race, both separately and together. Doing this enables safe discussions about the undermining nature of subtle individual racism as well as organizational institutional racism. This chapter includes a practice discussion on how the group can be set up and facilitated in different teams and thoughts on how to ensure the work of groups remain relevant going forward. As social workers, we strongly believe change can begin in an individual level, but collectively and organizationally, we can achieve so much more. Liz Vegas and Chi in chapter 12 talk about their work as in a large social work department to create organizational change that can be owned and actioned at every level of the service. And finally, but not least, in chapter 14, Cheryl Graham and Catherine Greenlaw argue that activism should be similar embedded within the allied health professions. Racism reduces opportunity for occupational and activists in anti-somatic to occupational therapists. Their stories show how they are building anti-racism activism in their profession, identifying and calls to all OTs to similarly take actions. The stories in these books of individual and organizational and national levels activism. Each chapter shows a positive and precious energy that forms a part of the drive for change. Like social work practice, social work action sets change in motion. Impact will be seen over time and in different ways. To be an anti-racist demands personal and professional responsibility for action, and we hope that these stories will we also encourage our colleagues across social work and allied health professions to see their own potential to make a change. And we call upon everyone to rise against racism. And in saying that as well, we would like each and every one of you to do a pledge, whether it's within yourself or within the organization that you work with. You could share your pledge with us on Twitter, or you can even write us on email. We can always share with you on Twitter as well. But on that note, thank you very much.
Thank you for that kind of summing up of the other chapters. So I hope that you'll see that the book is a tool really for you to start a conversation, to think about what you might do. And as Glory said there, that each of us in one of our kind of campaigns that we did was to kind of Twitter campaign to write to your senior leaders, and those letters are still available. If you still want those templates, we can make sure that you're available, but also for people to make a pledge. And in the back of the book you'll see some pledges that people have made, and all of the proceeds for this book go to Social Work Without Borders. So it's a key text, it's a moment in time, but it's going to be around for a long time, I think. So thank you for listening, and I'm going to hand back to Gavin.
Thank you, Nimal, and thank you to everybody who's just spoken. And we've had some really good comments coming in, so please do everybody take a look at that. Now, before I pass on, I'm going to just introduce you all to Carrie, who's been illustrating here. Give us a wave, Carrie.
Hello.
So, thank you, Carrie, and yeah, just tell us quickly, Carrie, what you're doing for us today.
Okay, so what I've got here is called a graphic record. I'm a visual practitioner, and I'm turning everything that you're saying into words and pictures. It's creating a bit of a mind map for you of everything that you're talking about. And I'm including all the subjects. So everything that you're speaking about is going up there. I'm not sensitizing any of the information. So it is all real, and I'm taking your energy and all your words, and they're getting up there, and I'll put some pictures in, and then towards the end, if you want me to run through what I've got, I'll be more than happy to do that for you.
Excellent. And I think you'll be digitizing it as well, Carrie, making it available online. I'd like to point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It will appear on Twitter hopefully later on this afternoon.
Brilliant. Okay, so now we are going to have a time for questions and answers, but what I'm going to do now is pass you over to Sharon and Farah.
Hi, everyone. So thank you, colleagues, for the first part of the session, really encouraging, and some of the personal stories really impactful. My name's Sharon Davidson. I am the co-chair of the National Principal Social Work Network for Children and Families, and I co-chair with my buddy Farah. I'm just going to kind of introduce us into the next part of this morning, and to just give you a little bit of a background. So the Principal Social Worker Network for Children and Families, in a meeting in around the time of George Floyd's death, we were in a joint meeting with the Department for Education and the Chief Social Worker, going through all of the stuff that was around in terms of COVID. And something struck me that as practice leaders, we weren't talking about the impact for us in terms of George Floyd's death, and the impact of racism. So what started as a conversation from my perspective and a few others about, well, what are we saying and how are we as practice leaders in our authorities supporting conversations and supporting practice around anti-racism. You know, how are we dealing with that? So as a network, we came together and we started to reconnect with the values of social work. And so for some of us, we hadn't lost that. And for others, anti-racism, anti-oppressive practice had been watered down, or it had been silenced in terms of people's experience. And we were determined, Farah and I, connected through those conversations to carry on thinking about it and reconnecting with the values of social work. So fast forward a bit, through those conversations, Farah and I decided that one way that we're going to do that is to kind of put ourselves out there. We're going to be courageous, and we put ourselves forward jointly to be the chairs for the network when the election came up. Well, actually, I said, Farah, I think you should do it. And she said, Sharon, I think you should do it. And then we said, well, let's go for vice chair. Because as women, we kind of sometimes underplay our power and our voice. And then we were told, well, no, you can't be a joint vice chair. So we said, okay, let's be brave and let's go for the chair. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the fact that in our own way, we were demonstrating what we kind of talked to others about, which is being courageous. And the result of that was also that the vice chair for the network is a black male. So for the children and families, this was the first time that there's an all-black chair team. And that's really been powerful. And part of that conversation also led into conversations with Sarah, who's on the call, about how do we think about this much more than just a conversation? How do we start to make a change and make a difference? And through those conversations, a steering group came about. And I'll hand over to you, Farah, because otherwise I'll keep talking and forget that there's others that have a story to tell as well.
Thank you, Sharon. Hi, everyone. It's so lovely to see so many names that I recognise and so many, wonderful social workers taking time out of Friday morning to join us. And I've got to say, one of the, for Sharon and I, the drivers were around, we can't separate our personal from this work. We can't, as women of colour, I know that term isn't comfortable for everyone. It's a term that I find fits me right now, so I do apologise to people because we're all on a journey of learning, but that's how I feel is best describes me right now. And we are a few, and whilst between us we've got 50 years social work experience. I know you think we look incredibly young for that.
I do, Farah, thank you.
But what we wanted is not to just become the black and brown faces who always talk about racism as well. What we wanted is actually, we've got lots of other skills and experience that we bring to the profession and be able to lead in this area. And that's where I think that where colleagues who were for the anti-racist social work, the book highlighted really well is the need for allyship. This isn't just where people are expected to share their lived experience. This is very raw. At times I feel threadbare emotionally with racism, and this week has been particularly tough because of the events, the review that's been released around that child, the poor schoolgirl, and her experiences. And at those times when I have felt threadbare, Sharon and I have supported each other, and in those arenas we've had the support of when Sharon mentioned Sarah from Social Work England, Anna from What Works, Jenny, our adult network chair. It's really important that it's not just black and brown voices, and that we connect and we hold and support each other, and that's been vital, but also taking this work forward. And that's how the survey organically came out, because we wanted to touch base, capture some of the energy around COVID and the hurt and from George Floyd's death, but actually, you know, there are many more experiences here. You know, we're not looking out of the window across the pond at racism. There are many, many experiences here on a daily basis, and we didn't want to lose that energy around doing something differently. So what we wanted is, you know, some of us had a voice. We were getting a voice, although it was hard for us as well, and it came with challenges. We were conscious that we wanted to hear the voice of all social workers and give them the opportunity to be able to, you know, whatever race they were, that they had a contribution and a responsibility for this work. And that's how the survey came about. And what we needed is a platform to be able to do that, to reach out to all social workers, whether they were local authority, whether they were independent, whether they were adults or children, that if they wanted to, they could contribute to this survey. And you know, that's where Social Work England you know, has a national platform where they were able to do that. And so, you know, we were fortunate with the number of respondents. We also and I thought we were going to share the slides, but sorry, I can't see them, but I've got them to hand. But we also wanted clear objectives. What did we want from the survey? We wanted to understand the scale of the issue. We wanted to understand, you know, the scale of racism in our profession. And that's because often we talk about racism from service users, but what I can tell you and what all of you will know is racism happens for social workers, from colleagues, from management, from the system. You know, that racism, we know about institutional racism, so it's much more broader than that. Can you go to the next page, please? And so we wanted to understand the, you know, the whole kind of experiences and racism as a whole. We also wanted to look at good practice, because within wherever there are issues, social work is a profession, and I'm really proud to be a social worker, where people will have a real sense of social justice and want to change and want to do better and want to do differently. I think one of the problems is that unless you experience racism, you know, sometimes you're blind to racism and the layers of racism that go on. So we wanted to identify examples of good anti-racist practice, and you know, I want to personally thank you know, kind of my co-chair, my colleague who isn't here, the vice chair, but also people in this group, in the steering group, who have enabled us to share good practice as well. So we wanted to capture that nationally, because we were conscious that there's lots of good practice that goes on that we could learn from. So I could talk about this forever. I'm passionate about this because it impacts on me, it impacts on my children, and I don't want it to impact on my grandchildren. They are very young, they are 5 and 7 months old, beautifully blended of lots of cultures, and I want their world to look different, as I do for all of your children and grandchildren. And unless we actively take this forward together, it's not going to. So I'm going to hand you over to Anna, our colleague from What Works, for the next part of this section. You're on mute, Anna. I want to say that.
Nightmare. Next slide, please, whoever's operating them. So yeah, morning everybody. I'm Anna Batu. I'm a social worker and director of practice at What Works for Children's Social Care, and I was really delighted to join the steering group sort of in the early part of last year to do whatever we can as an organisation to help this project forward. And our role here really has been about the function of undertaking a survey and analysing the data. So in comparison to all these incredible, rich, lived experience stories we've heard today, mine's the boring bit in the background, trying to make the data work. But this slide is just a short explanation about what we did in order to try and get the survey out to as many people as possible. And as Sharon and Farah have already mentioned, it was really important to us that the survey reached as many people as possible, both children's and adult social workers, people in statutory settings, but also in independent and third sector organisations, and people of all ethnicities. We wanted the survey to have really good representation of all social workers. So we took the approach of trying to promote it as far as possible through mechanisms such as Social Work England's newsletter, which we know has a very wide readership, our own newsletter, and we also created a short film that we promoted through social media channels. And I'm really hopeful that people on the call, this isn't the first time you've heard about the survey, and I very much hope that you participated in it. We had close to 2,000 responses, which is really fantastic, given that the survey was only open for a couple of months last summer. And we also asked people within the survey whether they would be interested in having a further conversation about their experiences of good practice, and nearly 500 people indicated that they would. So we were really encouraged by the level of engagement people had with the survey, and it also helps us be I suppose the results are more reliable. Effectively, with a sample size that high, we can really rely on these findings as a platform to move the anti-racist practice work forward. I'm now going to hand over to the following slide, where you can start hearing about some of the results.
Thank you. Thanks, Anna. I think it's over to me now for the next couple of slides. My name is Sarah Blackmore, and I'm the Exec Director for Strategy, Policy and Engagement with Social Work England, one of the partners in this study. And you've heard a bit from Farah and Sharon about how this partnership came about and how the study came about. And I'm not going to repeat what they've said, because I couldn't be nearly as articulate as they are. But you know, it was a real sense of partnership and wanting to do something very proactive to address some of the issues that are being raised with us as the regulator on a daily basis. And we've had some real soul-searching conversations, both internally and with partners like the anti-racism group. And you know, there's really looking at within our organisation and externally through these partnerships how we can really embed that commitment that we all have collectively to being sector leading in all matters to do with equality, diversity and inclusion. And there's so much for us to do and so much for us to be across. And Amina and I have been working with colleagues across the social work sector to look at where change is needed and our role within that. This survey was a really important part of that work, and it's been a great example of partnership working across a number of different agencies. As you can see, the feedback that we've received from social workers is stark, and the statistics speak for themselves. You know, 34% of Black or Asian social workers reporting racism from the people that they work with. 20% of respondents witnessing colleagues experiencing this, and 9% experiencing racism directly from colleagues and or from managers. And those are just the people who responded to the survey. Can we go on to the next slide, please? The anecdotal experiences that we heard were also grim, to say the least, and I think for all of us made difficult reading. And again, we had some more difficult and challenging conversations with ourselves as we were looking at the results and what that meant and what that was telling us about the social work sector and the experiences of our colleagues. As you can see there, people passed over for promotion with more experience and or more qualifications than white colleagues who were promoted. The impact of microaggressions and unconscious bias that people experienced on a daily basis, and the disproportionality of expectation on Black workers in terms of heavier caseloads and then being criticised for not performing adequately. While I'm not surprised to read any of this, I think the whole team felt a deep sense of disappointment and anger at what our colleagues are experiencing. And I'll now pass on to Amina for the next slides. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everybody. I'm Amina Akhtar. I'm a social worker and also the head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. And agree with what Sarah said, that it was really difficult to read much of what was in the report, and actually quite a lot of it resonated with my own experiences as well. I was really conscious of some of the impact that this work has on colleagues who are from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds. And as Sharon and Farah have already said, it felt really important to make sure that we broaden out these conversations and really think about how we work on these issues collectively, so that it doesn't just sit with people who are from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds. And I think not just what was in the report, but also the reflections that we've heard from colleagues who were involved in the anti-racist social worker book really speak to the impact that experiencing racism can have. And again, we can see here from the findings that 1 out of 10 social workers are considering leaving their organisation due to racism. And we all know that there's a real issue with retention and recruitment within social work. And actually, we absolutely don't want this to be one of the reasons for why we're losing really good quality social workers. 19% of respondents also have reported that workplace racism has increased their anxiety. Again, not unsurprising. I know that this has been an impact for me personally, and some of the reflections in the group really spoke to this as well. And it's also had a real detrimental impact on people's mental health. And again, not surprising, because it really correlates with existing research that suggests that experiencing racial discrimination and injustice really takes a heavy toll, and can obviously act as a trigger for chronic stress, depression, and racial trauma as well. If we can move on to the next slide, please. What was really positive to see was that 80% of people felt that they were comfortable and confident when in intervening when they witnessed racism. And it feels really important for people to be able to be supportive. And actually, we've already heard some reflections around allyship and the importance of that and feeling supported when you are dealing with racism. 76% felt that if there was someone that they could approach for support if they witnessed racism, it made them feel more confident in being able to do so. And yet 40% of Black or Asian social workers felt that the organisation wasn't doing enough to address racism. And I think much more can be done based on the survey findings. What felt really key throughout the research for me was that people would feel much more confident if they felt that there was some managerial or senior support within their organisation, being offered some emotional support as well, and encouragement from their colleagues and their managers as well. And also having some real clear clarity on expectations from the organisation. So having good policies in place to be able to support them to challenge, knowing who they were able to reach out to in order to support them to challenge, and making sure that we were keeping racism and diversity on the agenda. So talking about it in team discussions and team meetings, so that it wasn't something that is swept under the carpet, or that we only talk about when issues arise, like the murder of George Floyd. It needs to be something that we keep on the agenda on a regular basis. And I think it feels really important to make sure that as Social Work England, we are part of the anti-racist steering group and really able to use our influence to be able to drive this work forward. So I'll hand over to Jenny now to talk about next steps.
Thanks, Amina. Hi everyone, I'm Jennifer Rees and I'm the Principal Social Worker for Adults in Islington, London Borough of Islington, and also the Chair of the National Adults Principal Social Worker Network. And for me, it was an absolute top priority on a personal and professional level to be, fully involved and fully contributing to this really, really important work. I just feel that it's so important that this is driven and also reaches out across all aspects of social work, whether it be children's or whether it be adults. And for me, I'm on a personal journey, I guess, and I want to step into that allyship space and that allyship role. but know that I will, and I do make mistakes along the way. I don't fully understand all of the issues and all of the lived experiences, and this is work in progress for me personally and also professionally, but absolutely committed to stepping into that space. And I know it won't feel comfortable, and I know that I've got a long way to go, but I'm just incredibly committed to this area of work to try to be action orientated on a day-to-day basis, really trying to bring an end to the pervasive trauma and damage and harm that discrimination does bring about for individuals as well as organisations and as well as communities. So it's been a fabulous experience to be involved. So following the survey and the initial findings of the report, we set about arranging some engagement events, because we had a great sort of interest from about 500 people in actually coming along to some further engagement events to really try to unpick and get underneath some of the issues that emerged and the views that emerged from the initial survey. And we had some really interesting, really in-depth, really honest and brave discussions and conversations at those engagement events. And, we are hugely grateful to the people who actually gave up their time in that way. And these were the four main themes emerged from those engagement events, and really sort of leading on from what others have said. The strongest theme was actually that organisational responsibility for anti-racism, and many examples were given of how organisations really need to step up and act beyond just having policies, just beyond having mechanisms of reporting racist incidents. People were giving some really good examples of programs that currently exist, such as reverse mentoring, forums for Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff. Suggestions were being made around how to increase the frequency and the nature of the conversations about racism, so that they do become everyday conversations, such as including it in team meetings and supervision, and also that lack of diversity which we all know and recognise at senior levels within organisations too. Allyship was another important issue that was raised, and noted that as white colleagues, we lack confidence in engaging in conversations about racism, and sometimes don't even see it as relevant for us. So there is a real need and a real call for white colleagues and leaders to have, go out of their way and develop and gain that greater understanding of structural racism, also microaggressions, and the impact that all of these types of racism have on individuals and professionals as well, and to really step into that allyship role, really hugely important. And then there were some points raised around really strengthening and really embedding the need for anti-racist practice within professional standards as a mechanism for really driving this action and driving this change and driving this improvement. And so people suggested that professional standards could be much more explicit about anti-racism, and that registration renewal could have that as part of the requirement there as well. And then finally, social work education, because actually this area of work and this area of change needs to be acted on and embedded in all aspects of social work. And social work education is absolutely key. Several sessions discussed how anti-racism isn't always specifically highlighted in social work qualifying courses, and that teaching about anti-discriminatory practice alone is not sufficient to create that anti-racism, that anti-racist workforce, but it is a key part. And so, there's a real need, I think, to really strengthen and improve anti-racist practice at the heart of social work training, and perhaps also for other people who are involved within the social work and social care sector as well. So, you know, direct carers, foster carers, and people from voluntary sector organisations as well, so that, you know, this becomes a sector-wide movement and drive for change. So those were the 4 sort of themes that emerged from those engagement events. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So what are we going to do next? What are the next steps? Well, we have a report, we have themes, we have views and issues that give us a really sort of clear mandate and a clear message. So what we want to do now is we want to develop a collaborative engagement event. Possibly we're thinking about May, I believe, and so we need to now develop our action plan so that we can really determine what the actions are going to be. And this is going to be the most important phase, really, because, you know, as I think we've all mentioned today, you know, these are not new issues. These have been around for a long time, and really the time now is to act, not to talk, not to think, but to act, and to make sure that changes really do happen. But we want to work with key stakeholders, practitioner groups, key professionals across social work and social care sector, so that we can be really collaborative, we can really co-produce an action plan that's going to be meaningful, and it will actually have that direct impact and that direct change that we need. So we haven't finalized exactly what that's going to look like, but it will be a we believe it needs to be a practical event, so that we do come up with key actions that will then be taken forward and that will be meaningful and relevant for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you all to our speakers. We are going to have a Q&A session now, but just before I do that, and I'm also looking at Carrie's image here. It's looking great. Carrie, do you want to just tell us if there's anything to stand out for you on the tapestry that you've been putting together?
That's me.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, okay. There was a slight break up there. I didn't hear the last word that you said.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Just kind of no. If there's
that's cool.
any
You can hear me. I'll go for it.
No, it's
So,
yeah.
what I've got here then is the things that you've been talking about. I won't go into all the little detail bits, but you can see that when it comes online later. But the big points that have come out. So you've got to support and protect everyone. Okay, so that goes across the board. But there are differences. So it's understanding the scale and the nature of racism in social work in the profession. It is time to act now. Social work has a huge, diverse workforce, and it's time to be courageous. There always needs to be a focus on anti-racism, because if we stop having the conversation, then things won't be dealt with. It will be swept under the carpet and people will forget. It will become quiet, and it's not something that we want to be quiet about. So support people to have that voice. Really give them the opportunity to do that. This drive for a change creates an energy. So jump on that energy bus, because everybody wants to feel safe and everybody wants to belong. We need to identify examples of good anti-racist practice. So there are things that are starting to happen already. There's lots of innovative stuff that's going on. You talked hugely about the book. I missed the title of the book, so somebody pop that in the chat for me so I can write that on the board, the actual title of the book. That would be good. I don't want to keep calling it the book, unless it is the book. So we could highlight some of that. We need to produce some standards and the stuff that's going on. You've talked about the res. You've talked about there being an organisational responsibility, that senior managers must be in on all of this, that it has to have the buy-in from everybody. It's time for colleagues to come together, to listen, to start to support each other. So create forums for decent, wholesome conversations. And when you've done all of this, then you really start to disrupt that status quo. And that's when things start to shift.
Great stuff, Carrie. I've just noticed that Omar has actually managed to join us. So we are going to go to some questions, but we can't miss that opportunity. So Omar, you put something in the chat, but if you want to stick on your camera and microphone, that would be great. Here we go.
Cool.
Great to see you.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I wasn't expecting to be put on the spot, but yeah, just to kind of reiterate what I put into the chat, myself and Diana, we're social work students, and we're in our third year at the moment, but we've been actively trying to be involved in activism in so many different areas. But anti-racism is one of the key parts of something that we're really passionate about, and something that we've been championing since we were very, very little, because we always felt like it wasn't a choice. Anti-racism is something that we need to do. It's part of our identity, and we see that as people who have lived experience of racism, but also as social work students. It's part of our identity as social workers to promote the kind of the values and the ethics of the profession around social justice, around human rights, and leaving no one behind is something really, really key, and links in well with everything that we're saying. And I think every single one of us is a leader in social work, no matter where we are at in the profession and our careers, and we all have a voice, and we all just need to use it. So yeah, that's everything for that I'll say. And get the book.
Thank you, Omar. So here we have an opportunity for some questions. So if you want to put things in the chat, please do. Otherwise, we might be able to, if you put your hand up, we might be able to bring you in verbally as well.
Gavin, can I come in? There was a question quite a bit earlier on that came up, and I just made a note of it that I'm happy to pick up. Somebody talked about how we support some of the changes that are taking place in social work education and some of the challenges that they've experienced. Unfortunately, I made a note of the question, but not your name, so I do apologise. But I just wanted to pick up on a couple of key things. So I believe my colleague Kate did pop some things that we've been doing at Social Work England as part of that, but I just wanted to also pick up the fact that we published our Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Action Plan, and within that we talk about how we've introduced our new education and training standards, which include requirements around supporting students and embedding equality, diversity and inclusion in course design and delivery. There are some specific actions as well around thinking about how we support that implementation and how we monitor it. I think there was a further comment around making sure that it's more than policies. So one of the things that we do as our role as the regulator is carry out an approval process, and we'll be able to build a much clearer idea about how courses are embedding EDI within their delivery and design. We've also committed to developing some learning outcomes that will be publicly consulted on. We'll be sharing more information about how people can get involved in that in due course, but they will also look at how we include equality, diversity and inclusion as part of those learning outcomes as well.
Thanks, Amina. We've got a couple of hands up, so we'll start with Dame Lorna Borland-Kelly. If you want to come in, put your microphone on.
Yes, okay. I just wanted to say how important it was that the survey that was carried out, sort of initiated by the two principal social workers in Children and Family and What Works. I think it's something that I think social workers got engaged because it was independent. It wasn't some local authority saying, please do this. It was seen as independent. And the fact that it's now been published, I think we must do everything we can to get the findings out there, because there's nothing worse than actually taking part in a survey and then not seeing seeing the results of it. And actually, the thing that I like about you said and we did, the what next is so incredibly important. It's not enough to just hear the voices. And finally, in wrapping up, I'd like to say to Sharon and to Farah, well done for stepping forward and being the first. It is an incredible achievement. Your voices have made such a difference in the sector over the last period that you have been the joint chairs, yourselves and your vice chair. Incredibly well done, and thank you for stepping forward.
Thank you, Lorna. That's appreciated.
Thank you, Lorna. So I don't know if anybody wants to respond to that, or I think it was more recognition.
I think, I mean, I agree with you totally, Lorna, in terms of one of the key points for, certainly for Farah and myself, and that we've talked about in the steering group from the beginning, is that we want the work that comes from the survey to be very focused around practice and change. We have lots of policies, and those policies make sense on paper, but what we need to do is we want something that really makes a difference in practice. And we want the one of the important bits for us in completing the survey was to also understand the experiences from different angles. So one of the questions pointedly asked people about witnessing racism, because we wanted to also start to build a confidence within us as a sector that we can call out, and it doesn't necessarily need to be the person of Black or global and minority marginalised groups to do that calling out. So yeah, definitely agree that is a point for us, that the next stage will be a co-produced action plan. It won't be just a steering group in a dark room doing that.
Thank you, Sharon. So probably got space now for a couple more questions. I can see Angela's had her hand up. So Angela, would you like to unmute and put your question? Angela, if you could unmute. There we go.
Took me a minute to get on again. So I'm from the States, so I was dreading getting up early in the morning to attend, and I appreciate the entire webinar. Has been great. I do want to point out, I agree with Sharon was saying, that everyone who has suffered, all marginalized groups must be acknowledged. But we have to remember that racism is a hierarchy. And so I think a lot of times everyone wants to jump in especially when George Floyd and all these other issues happen, everyone wants to jump in on what they're suffering from, which is great. It should be acknowledged. We have to tackle racism from all angles. But if we don't look at it through a lens of hierarchy, then it's going to happen to where Blacks are brought down to the bottom again. And so I just want to point that out. I think it was brought out through presentations throughout the webinar today, but that focus must not be lost in the shuffle, if that makes any sense.
Thank you, Angela. And thank you for joining us from the States at this early hour for you. Does anybody want to respond to Angela's points there?
I'll jump in and then others might follow. I mean, Angela, thank you. I think you're absolutely right that the hierarchy is quite important, and I think one of the things about our steering group is that there are players within it that influence that. So involved in the steering group are also colleagues from the Department for Education and for the Department for Health and Social Care, so from the adult sector. So that we're thinking about racism at all levels, and the steering group has also been part of a wider discussion, roundtable discussion with
sectors and leaders across social work to highlight that. So one of the points that Dame Lorna made about making sure that the report goes far and wide, we've been also thinking about that so that key stakeholders have it in front of them, and so they can't deny that they don't have an understanding of what some of those direct experiences are. But also want you guys on the call today to be part of that championing of change as well. So the report has been put in the chat. So share that with your colleagues, share that within the sectors and organisations that you're familiar with. Put it on your social media accounts. Let's, and encourage people to read the book. Let's keep the conversation going beyond this webinar in our own individual ways so that we don't lose momentum. And as colleagues said, that it's not just about when something awful happens, because there are lots of awful things happening all the time, but we want to make sure that we are consistently, as the profession that understands issues and experiences around trauma, we are the sector that should be driving, championing and leading the way in terms of anti-racist practice. And unfortunately, the survey's showing us that we've still got a long way to go.
Thank you, Sharon. We are approaching the end of our time. I think Amina wanted to come in there.
I was just going to end with I think Sharon said it so beautifully, but I just wanted to, I suppose, look back to February when it was Race Equality Week and the hashtag was action, not just words. And I think that really summarises what Sharon was saying. And given that we're short on time, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Amina, and thank you to all our speakers today. Just as we finish off, I'm wondering if everybody in the room can all put on their cameras and turn on their microphones. Let's see you all. Here we go. And put on your microphones. And I'd like us all to give a clap to all our speakers today. Thank you very much, everybody. We have a couple more events going on today. Details are on our website, and keep coming back to our website and come to all of the events that we have planned in the coming year. Just always keep coming back to the website for more updates. Thank you very much, and hopefully see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.